G'day guys, we've got a question here where it's saying that a total of 20 grand was invested in two separate share portfolios. The low risk investment pays 5% per annum, or the high risk pays 12% per annum interest. At the end of 1 year, the total portfolio was worth $21,455. Determine the amount invested in each of the share portfolios by the investor. Alright, so what we're going to use here today is we're going to use simultaneous equations. We've got multiple variables that we've got to try and solve for, so we're going to need to figure out multiple relationships. So that's kind of a something that's going to tell us that simultaneous equations are the most appropriate route to the answer in this problem. So let's figure out what we've got. So we've got two portfolios. We've got a low risk portfolio and a high risk portfolio. So I'm going to denote the low risk portfolio the letter L, or the amount invested in the low risk portfolio L. And I'm going to denote the high risk portfolio, or the amount that we invest in the high risk portfolio, H. Cool. So what we know to start with is we only have two portfolios for this investor to invest in, and it tells us that $20,000 was invested in total. So our first equation is going to be the low risk portfolio, the amount we invest in the low risk portfolio, plus the amount that we're going to invest in the high risk portfolio, has to equal 20 grand. Cool. So what we now have to do is we have to find another equation, because we have two variables that we need to solve for. So we're going to need at least two equations. So what we then have is we have what's going to occur over the year is we're going to add 5% interest to the low risk portfolio and 12% per year interest, or 12% interest to the value of the high risk portfolio. And once we've summed those two together, we've got a total portfolio value of $21,455. So basically for the second equation, we're going to add 5% to the low risk portfolio. So to add 5% to the low risk portfolio, we multiply it by 1.05 times the low risk portfolio. And we're going to add that to the high risk portfolio that's had 12% interest added to it. So you guessed it, it's going to be 1.12 times the initial value of the high risk portfolio. And if we sum these together, this is going to equal $21,455. Cool. Now, I'm going to use the substitution method to solve these simultaneous equations. I like this more than the elimination method because, I don't know, it just feels neater to me. So what we're going to do is we have to arrange one of these equations so it's one variable in terms of the other variable. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use the first equation, and hopefully that's quite obvious that we'd use this one because it's a lot simpler than the second one. And I'm going to rearrange this so I have the low risk portfolio is going to be equal to $20,000 subtract the value of the high risk portfolio. So that all I've done is I've moved the value of the high risk portfolio to the other side of the equation. Now what we're going to do, now we have L in terms of H, I can substitute, like the substitution method suggests, this into our second equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this L and I'm going to substitute it in here for the L in the second equation. And what that's going to do is we're going to then have an equation in terms of only one variable. So as a result, we can solve it. So I'm going to have 1.05, and rather than writing L, I'm going to write 20,000 take H. and then we have our plus 1.12h equals 21,455. Great. Now, what we're going to do to start with is I'm going to multiply out this bracket, because basically now we're just going to solve this equation for h. So I'm going to multiply out this bracket, and so I've got 1.05 times 20,000. Now we know 10% of 20,000 is 2,000, so 5% of 20,000 is going to be 1,000. So multiplying out this bracket, we're going to have 21,000 minus 1.05h, and then I'm going to add the 1.12h, and that's equal to 21,455. Cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to combine my like terms, and what that means is I'm going to still have that 21,000, but I've got minus 1.05 plus 1.12, so I'm going to have plus 0.07h equals 21,455. Now, once I've done this, I'm going to then just move the 21,000 across to the other side of the equality. And I'm going to do this here. So I'm going to have 0.07h is equal to 21,455. Take 21 is, you guessed it, 455. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 0.07. Great. Now this is going to be equal to $6,500. Now this is the amount of money that the investor will have invested in the high risk portfolio, which pays 12% per annum. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to use the equation that I initially found with the low risk in terms of the high risk, and I'm going to write therefore the low risk portfolio is equal to 20 grand minus the money in the high risk portfolio, or 6,500, which is equal to, now I hope you guys can all work this out in your head, $13,500. So what we've just done there is we've been able to solve for both L and H in this equation. So the investor would have invested 6,500 in the high risk portfolio and 13,500 in the low risk portfolio. So let's just recap of what we've done. First of all, after reading the question, we found that we are looking for the amounts of money invested in each portfolio, and we denoted each of the things we're looking for in terms of a variable or a letter. We then found that both of the variables, or the low and the high portfolio, had to sum to equal 20,000, because that's how much the investor invested in the total in both portfolios. So once we came up with one equation, we then found out in a year's time that they'd both increased by 5 and 12% respectively. So we then converted these percentage increases into an equation with the new value of the total portfolio. So once we had the two equations, and I would say that for most people, these parts here are the most complicated. But once we've got those two equations, it's basically downhill from there. We then get one equation we get one of the equations, and we make it one of the variables in terms of the other. So I made it L in terms of H. We then substitute it into the second equation, so we have the equation in terms of one variable, and that's very important. So once we had the equation in terms of one variable, we then collect all our like terms, simplify it out, and then solve for the variable that we've left over. Once we have that variable, we can then substitute that number back into that equation that we calculated at the start, where we had one variable in terms of the other, and pretty easily come up with the other variable. So it's not a very complicated problem. The hardest part would be finding the two relationships that we have between, in this case, L and H. It'll be sometimes X and Y, A and B, whatever. So what I would do is try and expose yourselves to as many of these problems as you can where you have word equations rather than just, word problems rather than just equations that it says solve these. Because to come up with your own equations is a battle in itself when you're starting out. So I hope this video helped. If you'd like any help with other linear style equations like this or simultaneous equations, if you have a word problem that you're still struggling to figure out what the two equations are, let us know and I'll give it my best shot. But until next time, if you like the video, give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys again next time.